Okay.
We're ready.
Yes, we're ready.
We're here celebrating the 11th Annual Encephalitis Conference here in North America, FACES 2014 Encephalitis Conference. My name is Wendy. I'm president of Encephalitis Global, and I am an encephalitis survivor.
And I'm Dale, and I'm on the board of directors of Encephalitis Global, and I'm an encephalitis survivor.
And I'm Ingrid, and I'm an encephalitis survivor since 1995, and I am also on the board. And in addition to celebrating our 11th meeting, we are also celebrating the International Encephalitis Day, the first one in
the World
Encephalitis Day with the British Encephalitis Group. So we're here, and this is our largest crowd this time, and we're having a great time. So.
Excellent large crowd.
Yeah, really great. So.
Full hour, but I do feel great to be able to share. Mostly what I'm going to share are a lot of the tips that I learned the hard way, and there are certainly some tricks to navigating the medical system here in the U.S. It's not easy. It doesn't sound like it's easy in other places of the world either. But anyway, we'll share what I can. And happy day after World Encephalitis Day to all of you, which was a big occasion yesterday to have the very first one. So thanks for having this during this time so that we could celebrate together. How many of you had never met another encephalitis survivor before today? Several of you. It's quite healing, isn't it? It's I look at this and look at all of us from yesterday and then pictures from past, and I truly feel like this is not just my family but kind of a calling in life now. And so I love being able to share my experience, but again, more about what encephalitis means to us. This absolutely has nothing to do with encephalitis, but I thought it was hilarious. That is really creative. I love people that are creative. I've had the opportunity to research a lot more about what's the true impact of encephalitis, and I was surprised when we compare it to other illnesses that it's really not that rare. I think what's gone well for some of the other illnesses is that somebody's really had the effort to get it on the map, and it's what I'm hoping that we can all collectively do is get encephalitis more known. Most people have heard of cystic fibrosis or ALS, and those things their frequency is 5,000 or less per year. And then you compare that to encephalitis, which affects 20,000 Americans, 500,000 globally on an annual basis, and it's just astounding at how many of us are affected. Kind of putting the story together recently, there is no cure for this. There are some treatments, and certainly a few of the cases there are things that medications that help, but there is no magic wand. And I think that's what brings us together here is to say, what do we do to best recover? How do you make the best of it? And I guess about 2 years ago, EGlobal put together a study that was about 250 survivors around the world, and that's where some of these stats come from. So the 65% are challenged with relationships or getting back into the workplace. That's a huge number. Over 50% don't go back to work. So that makes it not just a burden on that person, but for all of us, it's a significant issue and a very life-changing one. So I think if you haven't seen the study, it's quite interesting. You probably hear from a few people in here that participated in it. For those of us that have gone through this is a very common experience, one that it's isolating, and in a lot of ways, people look at us and they're like, well, there's nothing wrong. You have a full recovery. But they don't see the pills that you have to take because you forgot how to sleep. And they don't see the pills that you take because you can't concentrate long enough to stay focused on anything. And so those really make it quite a confusing illness for a lot of folks. I'm not saying anything you don't know, but this is interesting. As you talk to each survivor, these are the common themes that come up with everyone. I went to one doctor who said, you know what, I'm not sure why you're here because you don't have this anymore. And I said, well, I've got these memory issues and concentration issues, so, what do I do for that? And they said, well, you don't understand, you don't have encephalitis anymore. And I said, okay, and I was thinking, this is going to be a great appointment. I get to educate the doctor. And they said, well, encephalitis is the swelling of the brain. That was the acute phase. And I said, I do understand what you're saying. And I said, what I have are the residuals. My memory issues are the residuals from this. So, what can you do for me? And they said, you don't understand. You don't have it anymore. And I was like, okay, we're going in circles here. And they said, basically they couldn't help me. And I said, okay, well, if I'd had a stroke and I was having memory issues and concentration issues and sleep issues, then what would you do for me? And they said, well, that's easy. But you didn't have a stroke. And I was like, oh my gosh. So needless to say, after waiting 9 months to see this specialist, I didn't really think that I needed to go back to that person. Anyway, I want to talk a little bit about some of the unknowns. It doesn't feel so rare. I'm going to say that several times. I already have. But a lot of us, this can be financially ruining. It can be emotionally ruining. I mean, it affects all of us in a larger way than they realize. I've looked at different protocols that they have in other countries. In the UK, they have a great protocol, and once you have encephalitis, there's almost a doctor's checklist that says, well, first you're going to start with physical and speech rehab, and then we're going to send you off to go do this next rehab, and then they can tell by either your learning abilities or maybe through a neuropsych test when it's okay to start the cognitive training. But there's no protocols here in the U.S. for that, so it makes it very difficult. I'm sure some of you have dealt with that. What's funny to me is how often all of us say, we're kind of left to manage our own health care after this because they don't know enough about it. And I'm thinking, okay, great. You take someone that's brain injured and they put them in charge of a brain recovery, and that really makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? But there are doctors who care, and I've been through my own frustrations. It took me 12 doctors and 27 months to get diagnosed, so I have not been real pleased with the medical community in some ways, but there are ones that care. I think what's difficult for them is, by golly, we're not presenting all the same. One person comes in with vomiting and high fever and difficulty walking, and then the next guy doesn't have those, but instead they've got seizures and hallucinations and something very different. And so we are not unified in the way we present, so it does make it hard. There are some that are really trying to figure out how to make this easier to diagnose. So just about a year and a half ago, there was a report published that just defines encephalitis. Now imagine that. We could all define it pretty easily right here. But what happened is several doctors came together and just said, okay, let's at least agree on what a unified definition of this is. Now they're working on what are those treatment or the protocols for treatment. And so there are things being done in the background. It's not real visible to all of us, unfortunately. But even in the MRIs, and we heard from both of these doctors yesterday talk about, some MRIs you can see a very specific pattern. There's typically a very specific pattern for herpes. In a lot of the other cases of encephalitis, there's not a very specific pattern. And so, and some MRIs don't even show anything. Some MRIs come back normal. And so, there's also studies being done to increase the way the technology, improve the technology, so that they can have more conclusive tests other than MRIs. So technology is a little bit behind. And then there's those of us that, everything seems normal, and so it's almost like, okay, why are you here again? So I think that a lot of these doctors, do want to understand, but there's so many of them will either never see a case in their whole career, or they may just see one or two. So it makes it hard because they're learning with us. So, I guess that makes it a little more understandable for them, is that they studied it. They probably had less than a chapter of it in their medical school 30 years ago, and then suddenly here's this person that they would have never. Encephalitis just doesn't come top of mind anymore. So this group that I'm talking about is the International Encephalitis Consortium. It's a group of doctors. It's neurologists. They are infectious disease doctors. Some of them are pediatricians. And they're located all over the globe. There's about, I believe, 20, 25 of them here in the States. And then there's some throughout Europe and Asia and Australia. And they are, like I said, doing a lot of this research. In a few cases, they're responding to crisis in just in terms of reaching out to doctors who have not dealt with it so that they can talk to an expert and help guide somebody toward a better recovery. So yesterday on World E-Day, they launched their new website. It's a little cut off up there at the top. But anyway, at the bottom, you can see the URL, internationalencephalitisconsortium.org. There's some pretty interesting information out there. EGlobal is mentioned quite a few times, and the connection, just like here today. There's also some pretty interesting FAQs. I learned a lot just reading through them yesterday, and some just common questions that we all have. Some people are asking, well, if somebody got herpes, are they contagious now, or did somebody have to go be isolated or quarantined, or questions like that. Can I get encephalitis again? So there's about 20, 30 questions out there that I've heard come up, and so these doctors have taken the time to answer those. So whether it's rare or not, our symptoms continue to plague us. I think it'd be interesting to see out of everybody here. How many of you have at least 5 of these or more? Yeah, so it's quite changing, isn't it? I have to look at this with a sense of humor because I do have a day job that makes it. I struggle a lot with the fatigue and finding words, and so I have to look for the occasions to just kind of laugh. So I'm going to share a brief story about, this is my day job. I'm going to bore Carolyn with it twice. So during my first year of recovery, I had not been driving, and I was not really allowed in the kitchen. And I decided I was going to be efficient, and I wanted to just boil some eggs, eat something different for lunch. My husband wasn't home, and so I just decided, okay, I'm going to be self-efficient. So I went to the kitchen, and I started boiling some water, and I put the eggs in, and I'm feeling, all right, I can do this. And then I decided, you know what, if I go back to my office, I'm going to forget why I'm in here. So I went back to my office, I got my laptop, and I set it down at the kitchen table, and I'm typing away. And then I decided, why am I sitting in the kitchen? This is not a very good place to work. So I take my laptop back to the office, and I'm typing away, and then I hear an explosion. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, somebody has broken into the house. So I get up from my desk, and I tiptoe. I'm wondering, should I go find the pistol, or should I just, I live in Texas, you got to have a pistol. And I'm looking at the cats, and I'm noticing that they're not alarmed. They're not, running under the bed. They're looking at me, and they're looking back at the kitchen, and they're looking at me, and they're looking back at the kitchen. And so I tiptoe into the kitchen, and there are brown and black eggs splattered all over. The lid to the pot has put a dent in the ceiling. The pot itself is just charred. And I start picking up some of the mess, and my husband comes home, and I can't smell anymore. And so he opens the door and he goes, oh my gosh, what has died? And I'm employed. The joke's on them. And this was not that long ago, but another occasion working in the house, went to the kitchen to fill up my water, and I tiptoe in, and right there at the little handy refrigerator to fill my water, and water goes everywhere. So I try again. Water goes everywhere. So this time I'm thinking, all right, I better get eye level with it and make sure that I've got it lined up. Push it again. Water all over the face. The cup was upside down. So, so keeping a sense of humor is big, but also know that this changes our identity. We're different people. I call it the new me. And I like the old me, but I like the new me too. One of the things I learned from Dr. Jill Bolt-Taylor, she wrote My Stroke of Insight. She is a Harvard brain scientist who, see some nodding, you've read probably her book. She's a fantastic speaker and individual. She would give herself time after she had her stroke. She'd give herself 15 minutes every morning to just be miserable, to hate life, to be mad, to just be furious at the injustice of what happened to her, and then she'd be over it. And she'd move on the rest of the day, positive thinking only. And at the time I read her book, I was a really pissed off patient. I was really mad at the world. I was angry that this had happened to me. I missed the ease in which I could find words, the ease in which I could recall information. And then that part of me was missing and was so frustrating that my temper tantrum would last longer than 15 minutes. It would last all day. But after reading that, it helped me realize, you do have a choice in the matter. And you can look at this and you can laugh at, spilling the water over and over again and not understanding, that it's just upside down. Or you could laugh at that and just say, guess what? I can't wait to share this next story. So I hope you too can find your sense of humor. I included this because this is, to me, the way the doctors talk to us. They use these huge terms that I can't pronounce, and then they just say, well, don't worry about it unless this happens. You're like, could that happen? So I'm going to move to more of the advocacy part. So things I wish I'd known along my journey, I want to share in case some of you are earlier in the journey or, like me, continue to deal with new struggles, and so you find yourself needing a new ologist of some sort. I never imagined needing a cardiologist and rheumatologist and all the different ologists at what I consider not too old of an age. And so I'll share with you what I've learned. None of this is rocket science, so if you were looking for that, you'll have to go to Joel instead. So even though we all have to fill out all these forms, I have found that if I put my own medical history in one just brief one-pager, it's hard to do, I know, with all of our symptoms and ailments and medications, but I find that when I summarize it myself and they don't have to dig through all the forms, then I get better attention. I've taken the time, I've summarized it for them, they can see it, they can do it in a glance. I have, actually Dale helped me in a crisis. I had my hip replaced about 15 months ago, and the hospital gave me a drug called Tauin, which should never be given to somebody that's had a brain injury. It caused all the encephalitis, basically the onset symptoms to all resurface all at once. And I remember telling my sister in the hospital, I think I have encephalitis again. But I emailed Dale from the hospital bed and said, this is a medication they've given me. Something's not right. And he replies and says, they should have never given you that. So I think it's important. I don't wear a medical bracelet, but I think I'm going to start doing that in the future. One, to make it more real to the medical community, and also, so that they don't give you medications that, even though they had my medical history, they still gave me the wrong drug, and that was very unpleasant, to say the least. I think that the medical bans are something that, well, I'll just briefly share this. When I was getting ready to do a procedure recently, the doctor had called to just kind of go through my medical history, and they said, okay, so now what medications do you take? And I said, well, I'll take Lunesta, and they said 4, and I said, well, after my brain injury, I forgot how to sleep, so I have to take a pill. And he goes, whoa, you didn't tell me you had a brain injury during the medical history. I said, I told you I had encephalitis. It's amazing. Did not know. Did not connect the two. So we have a lot of educating to do. So these are a few things that I've learned. I send a letter to a doctor that's brand new to me. If I've never been to them before, I'm just going to be the next Joe Schmo that comes through the door. And so what I do is I'll write about 2 to 3 days in advance. Here's why I'm coming to see you. I don't do more than one page because they're not going to read it. But that way they're starting to think about why you're coming. And, if they're the type that, they only have 5 or 10 minutes for you, and if they've already thought it through, then you're going to get a lot more mileage out of your visit. I've done this probably a dozen times now, and it's worked beautifully every time. Sometimes the office people they act as gatekeepers, and they want to say, no, you've got your appointment, you're not sending anything. And there's ways around them. Just fax it and say, put to the attention of Dr. Whoever. But I've found that works really, really well. So I think I just basically summarized that. State the reason. I've seen a specialist and still have an issue with whatever, fill in the blank, and had heard, give them a little bit of recognition to say, I've heard that you're brilliant in this space or something like that, and they will take the time. They really do stop and read it. It's amazing. When I got diagnosed, like I mentioned a while ago, it had been 27 months. I had seen 12 different doctors, and I made an appointment up in Boston at Massachusetts General, and in hopes of getting a final diagnosis. This was truly going to be my last. I was just about to give up and just feel like a time bomb for the rest of my life. But I decided to package everything. So I sent all of my medical records related to encephalitis, all the MRIs, all the doctor's notes, and that one-page letter that just said, here's why I'm coming to see you. I've got these residuals, here were the onset, and this is what, this is my experience today. And I sent it to the doctor 3 weeks in advance. And when I got there at Mass Gen, I sit down with the doctor, and he said, so, why are you here today? And I said, well, I sent you a packet. And he goes, oh, you're the lady that sent the packet. Hang on, I've been dying to see you. And I was like, oh my gosh, the royal treatment. But he left the office, he came back with everything, and he goes, I've been dying to meet you, tell me your story. And, so just taking the time to package everything up, I don't feel like I've just been that lucky in meeting all these doctors. I really feel like if we equip them better, then they're going to treat us better. A few other things that I use is a symptom tracker. And is it visible? Yeah, it's pretty visible. I've taken all the symptoms, and this is page 1, and summarized them so that they could see, here's what happened at the onset versus here's, what's resolved itself over time versus here's what's still ongoing. And I've found that they really like this. For the new doctors that I see that's not tracked me before, I typically hand this to them, and then I just stay silent. I just let them absorb it, because the more you're talking, the less they're reading. And so they'll read through it, and they, when they are done, they'll just look at me and go, wow, okay, this is very helpful. I've shared this with quite a few people. Some people like to add duration or intensity or other ways of looking at it, whatever your situation is. But anyway, just a suggestion of something that's helped me. I also find that if I dress nicely and treat myself like I'm the best, that they treat me better. So I love jeans. I can't stand dressing up. But when I go to the doctor, I put on something really nice and professional so that I'm taking myself seriously so that they will too. And it's amazing how much of a difference, if they just see you kind of being sloppy, then they're going to probably treat you sloppy too, unfortunately. So something else I've learned. For those of you who have read the book, you'll know that I don't take my husband on any appointments anymore. We're still arguing over the appointment where he told the doctor I was stressed out. But I love him anyway. I think that it's important, the more that the internet offers information, I also find that it's easy for us to start to diagnose ourselves. I think from my experience, when I go in with a preconceived idea of what the doctor should be telling me, they take offense to that. They were trained medically. I am not. and they can tell me and dispute things. So if I just say, well, I've heard about these things, but I don't try to say, and that's what my problem is, then I see that they can get along with that information a lot better. Yes?
But what do you do if you don't agree with their diagnosis?
Go see another doctor.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean,
I've had them all.
yeah, I think that every doctor looks at things differently, and some of them are going to take more time to think through. The ones that are ready to put you in a box.
And the ones that talk to him instead of
Yeah. I actually have a doctor that goes on doctor appointments with me. It may sound absurd, but I've had a hip issue for quite a while, and he doesn't want me getting the runaround. So he'll come in, and they just assume he's my husband. We don't even introduce him. But he'll ask questions on my behalf, and it's nice to find people that will be an advocate for you.
But doesn't it irritate you that, sometimes they do as if you don't exist?
Yeah, but if it gets me more answers, then it's then it's worth it for me.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Another thing is when I was not diagnosed yet, it was so frustrating to go in and know that I've had a brain change, but they're not treating it with priority, they're not treating it with urgency. And so it was easy for me to want to feel tempted to get angry with them. I find that the doctors don't really react well to that. So the more you question them, the more, kind of in your face you are, the less helpful they're going to be. So, even though we're frustrated and we have all these residuals, try to just forget that for the moment that you're there and not take it out on them, because I think that they're going to be a bigger advocate for you and be more willing to be an essential part of your medical team if you can, leave the frustrations to your therapist. I left all those frustrations to my therapist, so I had to go find a new one because he wouldn't let me come back. No, I'm just kidding. On the last slide, I'd mentioned finding, going through and being able to suggest maybe things that they're not suggesting for you in your recovery. So a lot of folks don't know that there's all these different therapies available. I just started cognitive therapy less than a year ago because it had never been given to me as an option. I kept hearing about it. At last year's EGlobal conference, we talked about neuroplasticity, and I was like, hey, I want some of that. I want to get better. And it has been really, really fun and exciting. It's challenging, and it wears me out, and I've learned don't just get up and let that be the first thing I do during the day. I know when I perform the best, and so it's generally around this part of the day. And so if I know that's when I'm going to learn better, that's when I'm going to do the cognitive rehab. But if it's at night after work and I'm just spent, I know the results are not going to be very good. I know if it's right after I wake up and I haven't had time for medicines to kick in, I'm not going to do very good. So it's kind of part of the listening to your body, and I'm probably the worst to say that because I'm the one that gets run down all the time. But you do have to listen to it, especially in the early days, in that first 2 years, really listen to what your body's trying to tell you so that you can take the nap if you need to. I used to sleep the first year, I was sleeping an average of 18 hours a day, and I didn't have a choice. It was just my body said, you got to do this. So I think that's really important to listen to ourselves. On the cognitive rehab, I thought I was doing pretty good. I just wanted to get better. If you see the START index here, the average adult starts at 85. So kind of like when I took the neuropsych exam. Who's taken a neuropsych exam? It's grueling, isn't it? Oh my gosh, it is not fun. That was a very humbling experience when I have these two little young medical students that are administering the test, and they give you 30 words, and they smile back at you and say, well, now you repeat back as many as you can, and you get 3 words, and they're like waiting for you to say more, and you're like, no, that was it. That's all I got. That was a very humbling experience, and so was doing this initial training. This is called CogMed. I'm not promoting them. I think there's a lot of programs out there. This just happens to be the one that my doctor got for me. But you do a baseline for 2 days, and some of them are short exercises, And it all depends on what you're trying to improve. So for me, I wanted to improve memory, short-term memory, concentration, following instructions, and math. If you look at the bottom, I've not improved so much in math. But on following instructions, it's improved by 52%. There's only one caveat. It doesn't work in following my husband's instructions, but everything else it applies. What was that?
I said I prefer the giving instructions.
Oh, yeah. And you will do this. So there's a lot of therapies. There are, cognitive, speech, etc. But I feel like the most helpful form of therapy is meeting you guys. So, when I found EGlobal, I can't remember who said it a while ago. Somebody said they're on there 4 times a day, and I was like, that was me. When I first found this group, and you'd read something, and you're like, oh, I do that too, or that happens to me, or I didn't know anybody else has that. So I just thought it was unique to me. It is very changing to be able to learn from others. I got tips from others in terms of being able to organize things better that I would not have known otherwise. So there's a lot that you can get just out of sharing with each other. I think some of you are aware, I think Dale mentioned at the beginning, I did write a book. Some of these tips are at the back of the book, things that I've learned along the way. And, I was just sharing with somebody a while ago that the original title was going to be Cerebral Assault. But I think Bob was the one that he proofread it, and he's like, it's a funny book. It's not an assault. So brain wreck is a lot more fitting because, I can't help but use my sense of humor. So I'd be happy to answer any questions. I think the most important thing is to thank Wendy and Ingrid and Dale for putting all this together. This is a lot of work to organize, so thank you.